Well, welcome back to another edition of CreekCast. Familiar guest this week, head coach Drew Carter joining me, and going to check in and kind of see how things have been going since our last formal conversation going into the spring game versus Gordon Lee. That was a little over a month ago now, Coach, and kind of hot and heavy into summer drills. Just had a 7-on-7 last week. Kind of get us up to speed on kind of where we're at right now in regards to summer training and in preparation for the upcoming season.
Well, like I said, going into spring, and I think I said it in a couple of interviews with the newspaper and our website. I really was pleased after the spring game. Me and you talked about what our expectations would be of what marks a good spring, and we talked about that going into the spring game. And I was really pleased because I really didn't know what to expect out of this group because we've got a lot of youth in a lot of places. We had the conversation of the veteran group on the lines of scrimmage on both sides. So you knew what to expect there, but you're trying to break in a sophomore quarterback, a lot of skill guys that are sophomores and juniors that don't have a lot of time and meaningful minutes. But really pleased coming out of that. And I think the growth that we've seen through the month of June has been exactly what we've been looking for. The weight room is really important right now of continuing what we did through the winter, a little more emphasis on the speed part too. And then the work we've done on the field has been really good. We're sharing guys with wrestling and baseball and basketball going on right now in the month of June. So we have to be careful with that we don't get diminished returns by overworking them. So we try to be really specific and be really fundamentally focused and detailed for the month of June. And that's what we've had.
Likewise with you guys, the coaches and the players, they probably watch film from previous season practices, kind of seeing what they can do better. Likewise, as the director of media, play-by-play guy for radio, I will listen back to old games. And I was actually listening back to the last two games of the season somewhat recently, the Adairsville game, in fact, this past week, and then the Lafayette game as well. One thing that kind of struck me as I was recalling what happened in those games was Lafayette wound up being a blowout. A lot of our young guys wound up getting a ton of playing time in that game. Adairsville, we had two of our star players go out early with Karen Bradley and Nate Tilley, and you were forced to play a lot of these guys who were freshmen then, such as Wyatt Mann, River Schote, guys like that. I think Kenan Hughes got in due to injury that night as well and wound up playing right tackle the bulk of the game. So a lot of guys wound up having to start and play meaningful varsity minutes in a situation where you had no one else to play and a playoff spot was on the line. Do you think that kind of helps? Because if you look at the spring game, a few of those guys that I just mentioned were kind of spotlights, high points in the spring game, like a River Schote, like a Wyatt Mann. I know Kenan was starting on the offensive line. There was a few others that I'm not mentioning right now, but do you feel like some of those important varsity minutes there at the end of the season will help pay dividends?
Absolutely, especially when you got a good opponent that they're having to play against in an Adairsville, and like you said a couple of times, meaningful minutes there. I mean, they got thrown into the fire, so knowing how to respond, understanding the difference in the speed of the game is huge. And I think those guys kind of got baptized by fire a little bit that night because I don't know if they were expecting that going into the game. But, that goes back to how we practice too. So that's on us as coaches to make sure that they're getting meaningful reps at practice as well. But, it's ultimately up to the player of am I mentally preparing myself throughout the week and watching film and the reps that I do get at practice. But yeah, I absolutely do. And I think that, and I hope that we're going to be able to reap the benefits of those guys having some early reps.
I want to shift gears a little bit here. One of the things that was a huge benefit to you in your first year as a varsity head football coach was continuity with the coaching staff. We've got a couple of new additions to the coaching staff with Coach Cameron Abernathy and Coach Will Douglas, and one that's not necessarily public news yet, but I'll get to it here in a minute. We have another staff opening, but first talk about those two guys and what their additions to the staff bring.
Been really, really solid hires. I feel like, it's tough today to hire high school football coaches, and for a lot of different reasons. But I feel like we really knocked it out of the park with both of those guys. Coach Abernathy came over to us from Murray County, was looking for a new challenge. He'd been coaching their defensive line over there. Obviously, Coach Holiday coaches our defensive line and handles our run game and the coordinator role. But he'll be coaching our inside linebackers. And man, he's picked it up really quick. He communicates with the kids great. They seem to respond to him. He's a really good blend of a good teacher, good motivator, and excited to be here might be the most important part. He's all about what's going on here at Coahulla Creek, and we're ultra excited to have him on board with us.
And then obviously we know Will Douglas is back, and he's not too far removed from being a player himself, but it's kind of nice to have kind of that family blood in the building here. You know, you got him and Coach Hernandez, who are both former players. So not only are they, just a member of the coaching staff, they've got some skin in the game having played here themselves.
Yeah, anytime you can get some guys like that have such a vested interest in what we've got going on, not just on the football team, we talk about as a program and in the community, and he fits that to a T. But the tricky part that you do have to have, and I know this from experience because when I first got into coaching as a graduate assistant, I graduated in May, and then that summer and that fall after that, I was coaching a lot of the guys that I was playing. He's a little more removed than that, but not very far. But you got to have somebody that was respected because he was a good player and because he did everything right. And then he's mature enough to handle it, and I think he checks those boxes. And he's done a good job because he's just a football guy. If we ask him to go coach our offensive line, then he would dive in head first and absorb everything that he has. So he'll have our running backs. Obviously, we're very familiar with the success that he had playing H-back for us. So he's going to have all those backs together. And he's really doing a good job with it. Like I said, he just absorbs everything, and he's looking to learn. He communicates with our kids really well, and I think they respect him.
I did want to ask you about Coach Michael Bolen leaving. I believe you said he's taking the athletic director job at Dalton Academy. But I want to bring him up because he's one of the few people left that were original to the school. He was the head baseball coach for years. He's one of the people that were walking around the building when the doors opened. He's kind of been an invaluable part to Coahulla Creek High School. He's an OG to Coahulla Creek High School, if you would say that. Kind of just talk about what Coach Bolen has meant to Coahulla Creek High School.
Well, obviously, my perspective on that is limited to the last few years. The time before that, I'm just relying on what I've heard from people, but also basing that on what I know in my 5 years of working with him. But that perspective has been unbelievable. I'm hopeful that we'll get a really good replacement for him, but there's nobody that can fill those shoes. His experience in multiple sports and starting programs, and building relationships with kids, I don't know if that can be replicated in any way. So we've got big shoes to fill there. And from a football perspective, you just look at the strides that our wide receivers have made the past few years and the strides that we've made as a passing offense. Obviously, we've had some good success with a couple of our quarterbacks, but man, we've had some really, really good players come through here as wide receivers. And he deserves a ton of that credit because some of those guys didn't have that success before he got his hands on them. And he's great at developing young men and great at developing young athletes.
Yeah, and I know several people saw the graphic we posted last year. Not very often when you can have 4 different wide receivers have 100-yard receiving games like they did last year with Nate Tilley, Luke Sweeney, who was first year ever playing football. Talk about some huge development there for a guy who'd never played. Yeah, Michael Bolen will certainly be missed. I just wanted to kind of give him a shout out as we were kind of talking about the changing of the guard here with some of the coaching staff changes. So before we let you go here, let's just kind of talk about what else is ahead this summer, some 7-on-7s that we have coming up, and maybe give you a chance to talk about our youth camp that's coming up.
Yeah, so you already mentioned earlier we had one last week. We hosted at home, hosted Gilmer and Ridgeland, and again, kind of going back to the same attitude that I had with the spring game. I thought we did some really good stuff. Not to say that I'm satisfied by any stretch of the imagination, but really pleased with the progress and what our players are doing. We'll get another measuring stick. We'll go next week, which will be the last week before we shut it down for the dead week. We'll actually have two that week, and it'll be really good because we'll go to Woodland for a 7-on-7 setup on Tuesday, and then that last day on Thursday before we cut everybody loose for the dead week, we'll go to Southeast, and they actually have a 7-on-7 and a lineman competition going on. So we'll get everybody out there competing and see how they respond to a little adversity and a little competition, and see how we go. But it'll be a good way to finish up June. And then, as you mentioned, as we come back from the dead week, later on in July, we'll have our 3-day kids camp where we've got all the 3rd through 8th graders coming out, and we're really excited about that. We'll be really excited this year because we'll be able to host it at the stadium, have kids on the turf out there. A lot of them probably hadn't been on that. But, we'll have a lot of our players out there, our whole coaching staff, and we try to run that thing and work them. That way they feel a part of what's going on with our football program and get a good idea of who our coaches are and what we're trying to be and what our identity is. And then want to come watch those kids that, coached them in their individual drills and played the games with them and build that rapport that way.
Coach, I appreciate the time. I know we'll catch up over the course of the summer at some point, and but keep working at it. And as we always finish off saying, go Colts.
Go Colts.